The Travel Transformation Podcast is proud to be partnered with Give the Goodness Global, an amazing global outreach project helping families in need all over Southeast Asia and beyond. Please check them out at Instagram.com/Give the Goodness Global today. And now on to the podcast episode.
Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, where we talk all things travel and all things transformation, exploring the life-changing potential of solo travel, intentional travel, and location-independent working. Whether you're an aspiring digital nomad or simply wish to boost your confidence through epic travel experiences, I'm here to motivate and inspire you to go after all your wildest dreams. I'm Jessica Grace Coleman, author, certified travel coach, founder of the Travel Transformation Company, and your host for the Travel Transformation Podcast. Travel changed my life. Now let's change yours. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Travel Transformation Podcast, the podcast where we talk all things travel and all things transformation. My name is Jessica Grace Coleman and I'm your host. And today I'm talking to the Managing Director and Innovation Lead at Accenture, Iliana Oris Valiente. In her role, Iliana directs teams across design, data, and all emerging technology. Her current mission is to cultivate a future encompassing overall technological and societal trends with a focus on the future of work, life, and human-centered approaches. She encourages leaders to step away from the work from home and digital nomad titles and welcome the reality of global citizenship. Iliana has extensive experience advising Fortune 500 companies to leverage emerging technology and embrace cultural shifts in order to scale and sustain business success. She also serves on several boards of directors, is a published author, and a frequent speaker at global conferences. We had such an interesting conversation in this episode, discussing Iliana's moment of burnout and how she healed herself through travel, the term global citizen and the implications of a global workforce going forward, and her potted plant theory, which I loved, that can help identify the types of workers and travellers that in turn will be able to help both employees and employers. It's fascinating stuff, so let's get to the interview. So, hi Iliana, thank you for coming on the Travel Transformation Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's a sunny Monday morning, so I will not find anything to complain about, really.
Nice. Okay, so let's start with a bit of background info on you so we can give our listeners some context. So I've given an introduction to you in the intro, but in your words, please could you tell me who you are and what you do?
I wear a couple of different hats. I'm a managing director at a large global consulting firm where I'm also the head of innovation. So that's my primary day job. I sit on a couple of boards and I invest and advise a number of startups, mostly in the emerging tech space. So I generally stay busy, but I also define myself generally as a multi-hyphenate, which means I wear a lot of different hats. I definitely identify as a bit of a global citizen / digital nomad. Friends of mine joke that I've been a global citizen quite literally since I was born. And so that's generally how I spend my time, bouncing around between advising the big Fortune 500 companies on emerging tech and the future and where the world is going and how they can adapt and be relevant, all the way through to working with the really new and emergent stuff coming out from the startup ecosystem.
Nice. And where in the world are you as well?
Right now, I am currently in Toronto, and then I'm flying to New York in a couple of days and then off to Europe towards the end of the summer.
Very, very nice. Okay, so you mentioned there your life as like a corporate executive. I believe you experienced quite a big transformation that came as a result of experiencing total burnout. So I want to know all about this. Can you tell me what the burnout was like, what led up to it, and what you did as a result of hitting this wall?
Oh, yes. And so this is actually one of the first times I'm talking about this burnout experience in more of a public forum. I've actually to date only talked about it in smaller groups when it's come up in conversation. I find that in the corporate world, it's still not discussed all that often. It's getting better. There's more of an emphasis on workplace mental health and the rest. But the long story short, I've been an achiever and a striver and always thinking about what's my next milestone for as long as I can remember. Part of the reason why I have been successful to date, I have this amazing role. I'm made managing director. I was the youngest ever managing director in the history of Accenture. And we are a massive organization. We have over 700,000 employees. So that's not a small feat. I'm definitely very proud of everything that I've been able to do. But, there's a trade-off and things come at a cost. And the pandemic, while a lot of people found themselves with so much spare time where they were able to get into sourdough bread starters and gardening and reading and knitting and the rest, I found myself working even harder than I had ever. I would wake up in the morning, roll over, look at my phone, immediately start responding to emails. And it didn't stop until 10 or 11 p.m. at night when I'd realize, okay, I haven't had a full dinner yet. And you get up the next morning and you do it all over again. And I was very much so motivated by not having to be in a position where I'd have to reduce the size of my team, because I just figured, it's a global pandemic. No one really knows what's happening. The last thing I want to do is be responsible for people no longer having jobs in the midst of all of this. And so orchestrating a massive strategic pivot to figure out how to change our business as a result of the pandemic gave me a lot of purpose and motivation and the rest. But the human body has limits. It has a maximum that you can push it to. And I think I had been ignoring a lot of the signs and symptoms that it was starting to give me. And the best analogy I can give you is your computer. When your computer gives you the little alert that says, hey, we need to do a system reset. Please restart now, save your work. And then it gives you the option of delay. And so you press the delay option and you press it again. And then a week later, you press it again until finally your computer says, sorry, we're shutting down in 3, 2, 1. You have no opportunity to save your work because we've given you plenty of time. Too bad, so sad. And that's essentially what happened to me. After a year and a half of being in a really intense lockdown, I was in Toronto at the time. I don't know if you saw the coverage, but BBC had Canada on the front page as one of the world's strictest lockdowns. Canadians, like myself, pride ourselves on never making the front page news. It's never a good news story. And so that tells you a little bit of how our lockdown went. And so finally, September 2021, the world was finally starting to reopen. And I was on a phone call for 30 minutes and I hung up the phone and it was just a one-on-one conversation. And I realized I don't know who I just talked to. If you were to look me in the eye, put a gun next to my head and say, who did you talk to? What did you talk about? I'd say, I have no idea. I also didn't know if I made any sense whatsoever. If the words that came out of my mouth, were they logical? Did I sound like a mess? And I had meeting notes because I always have meeting notes and I had my little notebook right next to me, but I couldn't read my notes because my eyes had gone blurry and I was a little bit cross-eyed. I was like, oh, and I just sat there, slumped in my chair, thinking, barely thinking, I think something was wrong and I'm not entirely sure what to do about this. So I called one of my girlfriends and her response was, Iliana, the words that are coming out of your mouth right now don't make sense. You sound like scrambled eggs. Please go do something about this. Like, oh, okay. Got it. Duly noted. And I just sat there in silence for the rest of the day. I pinged my wonderful exec assistant and asked her to just clear my calendar for the next 2 days because I didn't know what was happening, how long this was going to take. I had no idea that what I was experiencing was burnout. I just knew that my brain, which is probably my number one asset that I was definitely taking for granted, was not working the way it's supposed to. It just wasn't working at all. So that's the story of how I officially hit a wall.
Wow. Well, thank you for saying that and for explaining it as well, because I hear so many people talk about burnout and hitting the wall and that moment when they realized it was burnout, but they never really explain exactly what happened or what made them realize that. So I think that's really helpful for other people as well. And yeah, I can't even imagine what it must have been like just sort of sitting there and realizing you're not even making sense, when you're talking. Like, one of the things you rely on, your brain, your mouth, like for work, for anything, It just stopped, like, must be terrifying. So what was the first thing you did after that moment then?
Honestly, the first couple of hours or days were a complete blur. I didn't do a whole lot, but one of my very, very close friends was in Paris at the time. She had finished her MBA and had said, "Hey, you've been planning on visiting me in the past couple of years, but obviously the pandemic threw all those plans out the window. Why don't you come to Paris? This will be a really nice change of scenery. You can go to all of the cafes, drink all the tea, sit, eat croissants, people watch, go stroll through the gardens. It can be a very zen place in early September." And then, okay, you know what? Let's do it. And so I booked a flight. And a couple of days later, I got on a plane. And the plan was for me to come back in, I think it was 10 days initially. I had some meetings back in Toronto, and I was like, I really need to be back by then. So I got on this plane, flew to Paris, and it was exactly as she said, walking down the cute little cobblestone streets. But it wasn't just the physical setting that I was in. It was the fact that I also got to spend a lot of really good quality time with a very close friend that we don't really get the luxury to do this anymore as adults. Most of the time when we're catching up with friends, we're, quote, catching up. It's you meet for a lunch, you meet for a dinner, you meet for drinks or for brunch, you hang out for 2 hours, maybe 2.5 or 3 hours if you're lucky. You catch them up on what's happening in your life, and then you pick up and you leave. You're no longer really sharing a lot of the experiences of, living life with the people that are closest to you, because our work takes up so much of our days. We're all distributed, at least in my case, my friends are distributed around the world. So yes, it was a change of scenery and travel that helped with the burnout recovery, but it was also the comfort and familiarity of being with people that I know and that I really trust that were there during the recovery. And when I was getting closer to the 10-day mark, I actually wasn't drastically better yet, physically speaking. So I get to Paris and I'm thinking to myself, I'll respond to a couple of emails. I'll take a couple of phone calls. I'll still work. I very rarely would fully unplug. And I got to Paris and I attempted to take a couple of phone calls and then I'd lose my voice. Turns out I had developed laryngitis, which is inflammation of the vocal cords. And I sat there thinking to myself, I think my body is waging a full out war right now and saying, listen, we're turning off your brain. We are attempting to tell you to just slow down and stop. And here you are trying to fight against it. Like, okay, I'll just join a couple of these important things. No, we don't like that. We're taking away your other tool, your voice. I don't think my body could have been more directive with me because the body usually knows what's up. Meanwhile, my team at work was actually very concerned about me. I got a number of pings from people saying, is everything okay? You take vacations, every once in a while, but you're usually still reachable. But the fact that your EA has just blanket cleared pretty much everything from your calendar for the next 2 weeks, is everything okay? And I'm like, honestly, not really. I don't really know what is happening. But dear team, this is a great opportunity for you to step up as leaders and just figure it out. I would say to text me if you need me, and I'm accessible, but I honestly don't know how useful I'm going to be to you. And they stepped up and they did a really wonderful job at that.
So you didn't go back after 10 days then?
No, as I was getting closer to the 10-day mark, I looked at my calendar. I was supposed to come back for a board meeting for an organization that I'm involved with and a couple of other things. But I was like, okay, I could get on this plane and I could fly back. But if I'm not back to normal, am I really going to be that useful or valuable for those in-person interactions? I don't think so. I dialed in so that I could still participate and listen in and see what was happening, but figured I will participate more fulsomely once I'm back to fully functioning, and it's just not there yet. And I extended my trip. I didn't have a return flight at this point. I just canceled my return, said I'll book it when I'm feeling a little bit better. And what started out as 10 days turned into 2 weeks and then 3 weeks. And then it was close to a month before I was able to book my next flight.
Wow. And was that back to Toronto or was that somewhere else?
So I had a pre-existing commitment to be on the West Coast in the US for a very dear friend's wedding, and ended up coming to Toronto for just a couple of days to turn over, suitcase, pack, and then get on the plane for my scheduled vacation and actual leave. And in that time, I actually forced myself to continue to be on actual scheduled vacation as opposed to trying to work. My brain was slowly starting to come back online, but it still really wasn't there. It needed a much more extended decompression. And so we had done a road trip from San Francisco to Los Angeles, spent time at this essentially global friend reunion, because I'm lucky in that my friends are all over the world, but I'm also unlucky in the sense that my friends are all over the world. And once again, being able to spend this quality, unplugged, disconnected time where I didn't talk about work. In fact, I don't think I talked about anything particularly mentally strenuous for quite a few weeks after that. Just, the expression does not compute.
Mm-hmm.
That was what my brain was telling me. Does not compute.
Wow. So you were going to all these different places, hanging out with friends, and I totally get that as well. My friends are all over the world as well. And as you say, it's a great thing and a bad thing. But yeah, when you do hang out with them, you get quality time with them and you get to live with them rather than just catching up, as you say. So you had all that. What else did you need? Was it literally the rest and the time? Or did you do any exercises around this, any deep diving, any mindset stuff? Or was it literally you just needed a break from everything?
Sorry for the interruption, but I just have to tell you about Jessica Grace Coleman's new book, Intentional Travel Transformation. Boost your confidence, conquer your fears, and finally become the person you've always wanted to be, which is out now. This book is part memoir, part practical guide to help you transform yourself and your life through travel. Learn about Jessica's own tale of travel transformation, read unique transformation stories from the travel buddies she's met on the road, and make your way through her travel transformation framework, a method you can follow to create your very own bespoke travel transformation strategy. Your roadmap you can use to incorporate intentional travel into all your future trips. So, have you packed your bags yet? Because it's time to flip the script on your life and transform through travel. Get Intentional Travel Transformation now from Amazon, or head to www.traveltransformationcoach.com/books for more info. And now let's get back to the Travel Transformation Podcast.
It was the break. It was the change of scenery. It was time with people, and obviously the therapy to figure out, okay, what's happening? Oh, burnout. Oh, that's what I'm experiencing. Sometimes just labeling an emotion or a feeling is really, really powerful. And that was then followed with this train of thought I had of, wait a second, I've also been cooped up during the pandemic during this whole time. My job is to be the head of innovation. I need to be paying attention to the latest trends in society and tech and the rest. And I realized that while sitting in my home office day in, day out without getting on a plane, meanwhile, I had dreams. I had very vivid dreams all the time. I had all of these vivid dreams about my inability to get to the airport, or my inability to get on the plane, or you get to the airport and you realize you're at the wrong airport, or you get to the airport and you don't have your passport. I had every variation of that dream throughout the pandemic. And I realized what I'm really in need of as I recover is inspiration. And so the first part of my recovery was just time and space. The second portion of my recovery was, where do I get inspiration? Okay, I've always loved conferences. I've been part of that conference circuit for a number of years. Maybe I will build my next travel itinerary based on where are their conferences, where are my global friend groups going to be convening, and personal friends, professional industry friends as well. And that's what I did. But I can tell you, the very first one of these conferences I attended was around Money 2020. And there was a blockchain conference right next door. But while I was physically there and I went to some of the receptions and the dinners and the rest, I would walk into the main conference area. I would look at the agenda. I would go to the stage area, and then I'd turn around and beeline it out of there, being like, nope, not ready. I'm reading the words that are on these agendas. I'm listening to the words that these speakers are saying, and it's coming in one ear and out the other. It's not officially landing or registering yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the baby steps of re-immersion back into society, if I could say that.
Yeah. And how long do you think overall it sort of took you to get back to the place you were before the burnout? Do you have any idea, or is it hard to tell?
So it was about 2 months in where I was on a call with my CEO that I report into. And he said, how are you doing? And I said, well, do you want the real answer or the typical answer? And he looks at me and says, well, of course I want the real answer. I'm like, well, I'm pleased to report that I had a coherent train of thought yesterday. And it was a complex train of thought, so much so that I opened my journal and I wrote, I had a comprehensive train of thought today. Yay. Oh, Mamma Mia. He was so gracious throughout this whole process. I have to give credit to my two primary leaders that I report into, because in my day to day, having a complex train of thought is not something to be very proud of. That's my absolute bare bones minimum expectation as I bounce around from really complex client problem to another really complex client problem to getting into the latest and greatest that's happening on the generative AI side of things and what this means for a particular industry, and then managing large teams and the dynamics that go along with it. Suddenly, me having one comprehensive train of thought, my CEO just kind of looked at me and chuckled and was like, okay, I'm glad to see that you're doing better one day at a time. Let me know where you need help. I was like, oh, thank you for the support. This really does mean a lot, because it came so out of the blue.
I mean, that's so great that you got all the support that you needed and all that kind of stuff. So because of that experience, I know you're passionate now about helping employees and employers with things like avoiding burnout and using travel or global citizenship to feel better supported in their careers. So can you tell me a bit about this and about how you want to help corporations and employees around these topics?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when I started this whole burnout recovery and travel, I realized that I met other people on the road who were doing similar things to me. And they were also corporate professionals. If I rewind, and when you talk to most people about the term digital nomad, what comes to their mind is usually an image of someone in their early 20s sitting on a beach in Bali or somewhere in Thailand in a hammock, working as a freelance graphics designer and making a total of $15,000 US per year. And that doesn't resonate with me as a full-blown professional with assets and the rest of it. And so finding other people on the road who were corporate types, who were using the newfound flexibility that they had received during COVID around being able to work from home, and then pushing that to say, well, if I'm working from my living room in New York or my living room in London, can't I be just as effective if I'm doing this work from a living room in the south of France or the south of Spain or wherever else they were feeling inspired to spend time? And it got me thinking that the label of a digital nomad needs a revamp. It just needs a complete rebranding so that it's a more inclusive term of folks that maybe later on in their careers, later on in their lives, but still want to experience the world and do the travel and do it on their own terms. So one of the things that I've been involved in doing since this burnout recovery is starting to talk more to people about the global adventures that I was on, and essentially the experiment I was able to prove for myself that said, listen, it didn't really matter where I was working, but so long as I had an internet connection, my phone, my computer, my notebook, my brain, I'm fairly effective. And there's research that shows that some people are effective in working literally anywhere. They thrive in all environments. And there are others that really need routine, consistency, and the rest. And they need to know where they're working. They really benefit from a home environment, a simple, actual going to the office type of arrangement. But I'm part of the class that is flexible and comfortable and productive anywhere. And that was a pretty interesting aha for me. And now when I meet other people who are either on the brink of burnout or they're just not people that were designed to be stationary in life. And, when you find those, you say, hey, have you considered just picking up and going and working elsewhere? Obviously, look into the tax rules and make sure that you're not in breach of immigration laws and the rest. But there's suddenly a lot more flexibility than we had even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I love this because I use the term digital nomad myself, but that's because I don't really know what other term to use. And you're so right. Like most people have the idea of the glamorous influencer in their head with the cocktail next to their laptop in the sun, which just is not practical at all for any kind of like working situation. And yeah, I've had so many conversations with other digital nomads who don't know what to call themselves. Obviously, there's like remote workers, location independent workers, anywhereists. I quite like that term. But I really, really like the term global citizen. So can you tell me what a global citizen is and what it means to you personally?
Mm-hmm. So the terms I like to use are global citizens or members of the flexible class, where flexibility is the number one most important part. But flexibility means multiple things across several dimensions. It's flexibility around, sure, where in the world are you working? But it's also when are you working? Because if you come from North America and you're working in Asia and you have a 12-hour time zone difference and you're forcing yourself to work North American hours while you're in Asia, or you're flexing by, only 4 hours of overlap, that doesn't really mean that you have flexibility, because why go all that way if you can't really enjoy the lifestyle that comes along with it and the ability to go for a sunset run or a sunrise hike or having your coffee on a lovely terrace. So the flexible class prioritizes flexibility with where they work, when they work, what type of work they do. They tend to be entrepreneurs. They run their own businesses. They're not limited to small service provider businesses. They could be quite substantial, large, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, but they have enough seniority and sway to determine what are the outcomes that they need to achieve with their work. And when they decide to do the work is entirely up to them. And in general, they're really living life on their own terms. And I think that's the important distinction. I've been using this expression of late that I'm calling the societal conveyor belt of expectations, which is essentially this idea that you're born, you grow up, you get married, you do all your schooling, you're working, you move to the suburbs, you have 2.5 children, you work a job you dislike until you retire. You hope that when you retire, you have the health, the money, the friends, and the hobbies and interests to go do something afterwards. And then you die and you're doing all of this within a 30-mile radius of where you were born.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't that sound wonderful?
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah, totally understand that.
And at least in North America, that's a very much so the prevailing view, but it's not just North America. And so members of the flexible class are saying, no, I'm taking life into my own hands and I'm going to build a customized, bespoke life that makes sense for who I am, how I like to spend my time, what's the impact I want to make in the world. Let me redesign all of that. And being a global citizen happens to be at the core. It's one of the things that's at the core of that lifestyle. Because I know for me, my ideal is to have 2 or 3 home bases around the world. And from those home bases, go off and continue to explore and really feel as though I am living in those 2 or 3 bases. I'm not traveling. I'm not transiting through. I have a semblance of roots in those locations. And increasingly, I am meeting more and more people who aspire or are already living that kind of a lifestyle, even though it's not as commonplace and there's certainly no media attention on this, but it is an emerging trend. It's an emerging class of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I am in that sort of same boat where all my stuff is in a storage unit. I travel around. I really want at least one base. 2 or 3 sounds amazing. Like, I think that would be absolutely ideal. And I love how you called it polyamory for cities. I love that term. I want to steal it. So do you know which cities you would like to use as a base, or are you at the point where you've got so many options that you don't know where to go? Or how is that decision process going?
Mm-hmm. So I definitely want to maintain my home base in Canada. I love the Canadian passport, Canadian values, etc. My other 2 are still in a little bit of flux. I'm considering a base out in the Middle East, potentially in Dubai. There's just so much innovation happening in that part of the world, and they're rolling out the red carpet to say, hey, if you are creative and if you're working in the forefront of tech or innovation, and you can help our economy diversify away from digging things out of the ground, then please come on board. So I'm considering having something in the Middle East. In the US, I've been toying with the idea of Miami potentially, given that half of New York has moved to Miami. Half of California has moved to Miami, at least for the winter months. And we'll see what the next 6 months or the next 12 months or so bring as I investigate and still do my sampler menu of different cities out there to figure out where I might want to establish another base.
Nice. That is very exciting. And yeah, really, I think it's the best way to do it, like you say, and you really get to live somewhere, create a community, live like a local. You're not just constantly on the road, which is what I'm sort of trying to get away from, so I can have at least some kind of base. So yeah, that's really cool. Now, you mentioned the whole global citizen like workforce, how that's an emerging trend. So what are the long-term implications of that kind of workforce when everyone's mobile, they can work from wherever in the world? Are there implications for the workforce, for people in general?
Very much so. Skift publishes annual research on a number of topics, and they had published a report that showed the increase in the average salary of people who were identifying as digital nomads. And it went from an average income of $36,000 a couple of years ago to now the average person that's living this digital nomad lifestyle has a salary well over $100,000 US. That is a remarkable shift, and it suggests that many organizations are not aware of the fact that their employees want to have this flexibility to work from anywhere. Now, this doesn't apply to every member of society. This does not apply to every employee. I have this theory that I've been developing that I call the potted plant theory. And really, it posits that you can place people on a spectrum where on one end of the spectrum, they are sequoia trees. They're deeply rooted, tall, majestic creatures with very, very deep roots, complex root systems. You can't transplant a sequoia tree, even if you wanted to. It's not going to survive the transplantation, and it's just not feasible. But if you move along the spectrum, you get into slightly smaller trees. Red maples are a great example of that. You can transplant them once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, if all the right conditions are there, with the help of an arborist, and that tree can learn to thrive in its new environment. But you go further along the spectrum and you end up with potted plants. That's where I sit. For me, home is wherever I am. My roots are physically attached to me. If I wanted to take that analogy further, I'm a hibiscus plant because I can live in a pot, but you can plant me into the ground and I'll grow deeper roots. You can dig me back up if you wanted to, put me back into a pot, a newer, bigger pot, and then transplant me. And I can move room to room, city to city, country to country, and I'm thriving in that environment. And then if you go way further along the spectrum, the last point is air plants. Air plants you probably see when you walk into a shop and they're hanging in little glass jars with a couple of pieces of wood and some other shrubbery. They don't have roots. They don't need water. They don't need soil in the traditional sense. The occasional mist and the ability to take the humidity from the air is enough for what they need. And when you meet people on the road, you can very quickly figure out where they fall on that spectrum. The ones that are, quote, still on the road after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, chances are they're probably air plants. They are happiest when they're moving around, depending on where the next interesting opportunity is. It tends to correlate with a lot of the folks who are really artsy and creative and whimsical and all of those wonderful characteristics. While I travel extensively and I've done backpacking and the really extended trips, at the end of the day, I very much so identify with being a potted plant, where I'm like, I like having some containers, except that I just don't want one container in one place. I want to be able to have a little shoot cut off of me and plant it somewhere else, and to really feel like I live in multiple places. And so with this potted plant theory, I want people to help to figure out where they fall on that spectrum, and to then ask themselves the question of, how do I build a life that is in line with my tree archetype? And for employers, understanding where their employees fall on that spectrum is hugely helpful. Because if, let's say, 10% of your workforce identifies as a potted plant, you could roll out a new workplace perk that says, we're rolling out a work from anywhere policy. This is how we're going to support your lifestyle. And for those 10% of your workforce, or 20% of your workforce, they are going to be incredibly loyal. You will attract more talent and you'll retain the talent that you have. For the other 80 or 90% of your workforce that maybe identifies as a sequoia, they won't even notice that you've rolled out this perk. Or they might shrug and say, that's nice. That's not really relevant for me. I'm not going to take advantage of it, but I'm glad you're doing something that makes life better for my colleagues over there. But I'm really quite happy with my very settled life and my routine and the location that I'm currently in. So employers have very much nothing to lose and a lot to gain when it comes to attracting that demographic into their workforce. So that's where I definitely see some of the trends going. And this has implications for the workforce. This has implications for governments around visas and economic development and how do you attract people into your country. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Wow, I love the plant theory so much. I mean, you often hear workplaces and things using like personality types, like the Enneagram and stuff like that, to figure out how to talk to or communicate with their employees, which kind of work to do, what kind of approach and all that kind of thing. But I've not heard one to do with, remote work or traveling or anything like that. It's just so perfect. The whole tree plant, air plant analogy is really great. I think I'm also a potted plant, but I need to do some more thinking about that. But yeah, I love that whole idea. And I also, when I go traveling now, I'm going to be like looking at people and thinking, oh, what kind of plant are they? Are they an air plant? Are they a potted plant? That's really great. So before, when I asked about how you transform through travel, you said something about getting comfortable with yourself and how you like the person you are inside. You can't outrun yourself no matter how much you travel, which is so true. So how did you get comfortable with yourself through traveling?
So I'm fortunate in that I spent a lot of time when I was a child by myself. I spent my childhood living in between Siberia in Russia, very remote, and in Cuba, the opposite of remote, where I was constantly surrounded by people. And so I would go through those two very extreme environments. And while traveling, it dawned on me that you are who you are no matter where you go. How you choose to spend your time. Are you going for a run every morning? Are you going to the gym? Are you finding a consistent coffee shop to hang out of? Do you find yourself gravitating to the same types of people, regardless of where in the world you are? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. You can't outrun yourself. And I've gone very, very comfortable with who I am. I always have my journal handy. I always have a book on me. And fun fact, I have never used Wi-Fi on an airplane ever.
Nice.
And I spend a lot of time on airplanes because I find it's one of the few moments in life where you're in this beautiful setting. You're suspended 30,000 feet above the ground and you have 90 minutes or 2 hours or 5 hours or 10 hours just to yourself. No interruptions, no pings, the ability to drop in deep and contemplate. What do you want for this year? Are you happy? Are you not happy? Is there anything that you want to change? And so I definitely would encourage others to fight the temptation to always be consuming content, info, music, podcasts. I mean, I love podcasts, television shows, movies when you're in the air, and just force yourself to find those quiet moments and just sit with yourself and see what comes up. You don't have to do a 10-day silent retreat, but every person that's been on an airplane, try it.
Yeah, I love that, because you're right. You think like, oh, I need to fill my time when I'm in the airplane. I'm going to get my book. I'm going to watch a movie. I'm going to listen to all this stuff. And you're right. It is the absolutely perfect time to just switch all that stuff off. You're in the, in the middle of the air. Like there's nowhere to escape to. There's nowhere, no one's going to, come and talk to you about work and that kind of thing. And if you're an avid traveler and you do travel a lot, like you say, it is such a great time to just sit and think. Like, some people have trouble clearing their head or trying meditation techniques or something because they're constantly thinking about things. They don't want to take that time, or they don't think they have the time to do it. So that is an absolutely perfect time to actually sit with your thoughts and think about what you really want, and could not agree with that more. So I'm definitely going to do that next time. I'm going to put my book away. Not going to look at the movie. Yeah, I'm just going to sit with my thoughts. Okay, so I have 2 last quick questions. First of all, if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they find you online? And I can put those in the show notes as well. And is there anything else you want to say or any last message you want to get across before we go?
Absolutely. So people can easily find me on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to post a lot of content around the future of the world and humans living in it, and how we will work, how we will play, how we will interact, and how we need to think about various emerging tech trends. And you can also follow me on Instagram for more of my travel updates and commentary on being more of a global citizen. I also have my website that I'll send you the link for the flexible class, and building out a community of folks that really resonate with the term. And I'm actively seeking out additional partners. So companies that have already built products or services that make life easier for the members of the flexible class, and just really creating that community that, frankly, I had been searching for a long time. And finally it dawned on me, this doesn't exist. So therefore, I'll build it. I'll build the thing that I wish existed in the world. So folks can check out the website for the flexible class. And I've been developing a questionnaire and a bit of a quiz to help people figure out where they fall on that potted tree spectrum, and how they might change their lives to live in accordance with that.
Great. Well, I'll put all those in the show notes for anyone who's interested. And thank you so much for coming on today. It's been such an interesting conversation. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. This was a delight.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Travel Transformation Podcast with me, Jessica Grace Coleman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and spread the word if you have friends or family who also want to transform through travel. For a chance of winning one of my books in ebook form, please review this podcast on Apple Podcasts and send a screenshot or just your name to info@traveltransformationcoach.com or at traveltransformationcoach on Instagram. I'll be picking a new winner each month, and you can choose between any of my non-fiction titles, including Write Your Life, Write Your Year, and Intentional Travel Transformation. You can find out more about me at traveltransformationcoach.com, where you can also get your free travel transformation guide. And until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.